He texted me from Vegas at 2:47 a.m. to say he'd just married someone else. By sunrise, he was a stranger to every door he'd ever opened in my life. The locksmith looked at my phone screen, looked at me, then let out a slow, low whistle. It was 3:58 in the morning. I was barefoot on my own front porch in a Northwestern sweatshirt and leggings, hair still tangled from sleeping on the couch. He was in his late 50s with a gray mustache and a thermal hoodie under his work jacket, and he had the quiet, unshockable expression of a man who'd seen enough late-night human collapse to know better than to ask too many questions. "Well," he said finally, handing my phone back, "that's one way to find out you need new locks." I nodded. He hauled his kid up the front walk without another word. That was how the second chapter of my life began. Not with fire, not with screaming, not with the kind of dramatic rupture you'd expect when 11 years of marriage detonates in a single text message sent from a Vegas chapel at 2:47 in the morning. It began with a locksmith whistling softly in the dark, and me, already moving. My name is Clara Jensen. I'm 34 years old, and if you'd told me even 72 hours before that night that I'd be canceling every card in my husband's wallet before 4 a.m. and calling a locksmith at double rate before the sun came up, I'd have done what I always did when presented with something impossible. I'd have organized it into something manageable and ignored the rest. That's the thing nobody tells you about women who are competent. We have a dangerous habit of smoothing, of taking the sharp edges off other people's messes and folding them neatly into the life we've built until the whole structure is so functional, so calendared, so apparently stable that we forget to notice it stopped being ours somewhere along the way. My name was Clara Jensen. I had a brick house in the northern suburbs outside Chicago. I had soft, close cabinets I'd picked myself, a shared color-coded calendar, a mortgage in my name, and a marriage that looked from the front lawn like a perfectly curated life. I had a career I'd clawed for, 7 ugly years in consulting, then a pivot into healthcare operations where I learned to negotiate, budget, and stop apologizing for being smarter than the room. I had quarterly reports I could present in my sleep. I had a retirement account and a very specific system for tracking utility drafts. What I apparently did not have was a faithful husband. His name is Ethan. Ethan Jensen, 37. Broad-shouldered in that way that reads confident at dinner parties and becomes lazy by Sunday afternoon. He was charming in the frictionless, room temperature way that makes some men beloved at work and invisible at home. He forgot due dates. He over-ordered at restaurants. He bought gadgets, neglected them, and moved on. He assumed the money would be there because it always had been. Always had been because I made sure it was, which is the kind of thing he benefited from without ever quite noticing. He had kissed me on the cheek that Tuesday morning. He'd grabbed the carry-on I reminded him 3 separate times not to overpack. He'd said, "Don't wait up if my flight gets in weird," exactly the way married people say unremarkable things every day. If there was something slightly wrong in the tone of it, I either missed it or I felt it and dismissed it. I'd had a lot of practice dismissing things. He was in Las Vegas for a work conference, or so I believe. He was in Las Vegas with Rebecca, his co-worker in marketing, younger by 4 years, too loud at holiday parties, with the practiced innocence of a woman who wants to be noticed but never accused of wanting it. Once, at the company Christmas party, she'd complimented my earrings and then spent the rest of the evening orbiting Ethan like a particularly determined moon. I had noticed. I had dismissed. 8 months. They had been sleeping together for 8 months. Every dinner. Every weekend trip I'd packed for. Every morning I'd made coffee in that kitchen with the soft, close cabinets. 8 months of what I thought was a slightly distant but functional marriage had been, in fact, a slowly disassembled life being strip-mined from the inside. I did not know this yet when I fell asleep on the couch. The television was on mute, casting a silver wash across the living room. The infomercial was for some kind of steam cleaning device. An empty mug sat on the coffee table beside a candle burned down to a wax stub 2 months earlier that I kept meaning to throw away. One sock had slid halfway off my heel. My neck ached from the armrest. My phone buzzed against the glass tabletop at 2:47 a.m. I reached for it the way you reach for something you expect to be nothing, lazily, still sticky with sleep, eyes half closed, body already settling back toward unconsciousness. Maybe Ethan saying he'd landed, maybe a pharmacy notification, maybe a calendar reminder I'd forgotten to cancel. Then I saw his name. Then I saw the words, "Just married Rebecca. Been sleeping with her for 8 months. You're pathetic, BTW. Your boring energy made this easy. Enjoy your sad little life." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, because the human brain has a self-protective reflex that refuses to absorb catastrophic information on the first pass. The room was perfectly still. The mute infomercial kept showing clean grout. The candle stub sat there on the table. The framed wedding photo hung in the hallway just where it always had. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw the phone. People like to imagine betrayal arrives as an explosion. Sometimes it arrives as a freezing. Everything slows, breath flattens, the world narrows to the glow of a screen and the grain of a wood floor beneath bare feet. 30 seconds, maybe more. Time turned strange. Then I typed one word back. Cool. The phone buzzed again almost instantly. I didn't look. Something in me had already shifted, not shattered, sharpened, like a blade pulled cleanly from fabric. If Ethan thought one text message was going to break me, he had made a catastrophic miscalculation about the woman he'd left behind. I ran the life he was walking away from, and I knew exactly how to dismantle it. By 3:15 a.m., I was moving through my own house with the ruthless calm of an accountant closing books after an audit. The banking app first. I opened it, pulled up every every card that had Ethan's name as an authorized user and began. Cancel. Confirm. Done. Cancel. Confirm. Done. He'd always been reckless with money in that soft, socially acceptable way that makes some men look spontaneous when what they really are is irresponsible. He never tracked balances. He assumed the buffer would be there because the buffer always had been. Had been because I watched the statements, scheduled the payments, refinanced at the right time, knew the mortgage date and the utility drafts and the savings floor and the investment timing and the due dates on every subscription we owned. I knew our financial life with the intimacy other women reserve for recipes, so I canceled it, all of it. Every authorized user card, every streaming service and shared login, every cloud account, shopping app, security access, delivery account, and digital foothold he still had inside my life. Click, remove, confirm, done. The deed to the house had always been mine. I'd bought it 3 years before I met Ethan. After 7 brutal years in consulting leveraged into a better position that taught me how to negotiate, budget, and stop apologizing for competence. Ethan had moved into a life I'd already built. The mortgage, the title, the insurance, the tax record, all in my name. He had access. I removed it. At 3:30, I called a 24-hour locksmith. The man who answered sounded like I'd dragged him awake by the ankle. Emergency lock change? Yes. This late? Yes. We can do early morning. I'll pay double if you come now. A pause. The kind of pause that belongs to a man doing quick math in the dark. Text me the address. His headlights washed across my front windows just before 4 o'clock. He hauled his kit up the walk while I stood in the doorway barefoot, and he wore the expression of someone who had seen enough late-night human collapse to know better than to ask too many questions. Long night? He asked. Instead of answering, I held up the phone. He read the text, lifted his brows, let out that slow whistle. That's one way to find out you need new locks, he said. It was exactly the level of humor I could tolerate. It steadied me. He worked quickly. Front door, back door, side entry, garage keypad, gate, new deadbolts, new keys, new codes. While he worked, I reset the Wi-Fi, changed every security password, logged Ethan's phone out of every device authorized to touch the house systems. By 5 in the morning, the house was sealed. Ethan Jensen, newly married in Las Vegas to his coworker Rebecca, was a stranger to every door he'd once opened without thinking. The locksmith handed me 2 sets of keys and asked if I wanted a third copy made. I looked at the metal in my hand and said, no. He nodded like he understood my answer had nothing to do with quantity. When he drove away, dawn had begun to break in that reluctant blue-gray way Midwestern mornings do. The birds in the hedges had started up. The street lights still glowed. I stood in the foyer holding the keys and my phone, and for the first time since 2:47, I didn't feel better or vindicated. I felt in control. That mattered more than anything else. I went upstairs, stripped the bed because I could still smell his cologne on the pillow, threw the sheets on the floor, crawled onto one side of the bare mattress. I slept for 2 solid hours. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, someone started pounding on the front door. Not tentative, not embarrassed. The pounding of someone who still believed access was his by right. Memory slammed back. Vegas. Text. Locksmith. New locks. New life. I dragged on the first robe I found and went downstairs. Through the peephole, 2 police officers on the porch. One older, one younger, both wearing the tired expressions of men who had already been handed too much of someone else's nonsense, and it wasn't even breakfast yet. I opened the door with the chain still latched. The older officer, whose nameplate read Sergeant T. Briggs, cleared his throat. Ma'am, we got a call about a domestic dispute. Your husband says you locked him out of his home. Your husband. The phrase landed like something rotten. Without a word, I lifted my phone and held the screen through the narrow opening. Sergeant Briggs read it once, leaned slightly closer and read it again. The younger officer, Officer M. DeLuca, according to his nameplate, bit down so hard on the inside of his cheek, I thought he might break skin, trying not to react. Is this real? Briggs asked. As far as I know, I said. He sent it at 2:47 this morning from Las Vegas, after apparently marrying another woman. Then the radio crackled. A shrill female voice tore through in distorted outrage. I didn't need an introduction. Margaret, Ethan's mother. Her voice lived somewhere between offended grande dame and civil defense siren, even through static, impossible to mistake. Ma'am, Briggs said into the radio, already exhausted, this is not a police matter. He married someone else. We cannot make her let him back in. The radio screeched. He turned the volume down. She says you stole his things, DeLuca said carefully. I haven't touched them, I said. This house was purchased before the marriage. It's in my name. His cards were authorized user cards, not joint ownership. He can retrieve his personal property later. Briggs looked past me into the entryway, checking for smashed furniture or blood or any evidence this was the kind of domestic dispute police training actually prepared you for. Instead, he saw what the house always looked like. Umbrella stand, entry bench, framed prints. One of Ethan's shoes half under the bench because he never put anything away unless I reminded him. Just don't destroy anything, Briggs said. If he wants his belongings, keep them accessible. Other than that, he glanced at the phone again. Given this, he has no legal right to force entry. Of course, I said. They left, shaking their heads. I shut the door and leaned back against it and let out a breath that came from somewhere low and old in my body. So, that was how the day was going to be. I showered, dressed, tied my hair back, retrieved moving boxes from the guest room closet. Then I packed Ethan's belongings with the same precision I once brought to quarterly operations reports. Clothes folded, books stacked stacked, electronics wrapped, toiletries bagged, shoes paired, each box labeled clearly in black marker: clothes, books, electronics, office, misc, with the kind of specificity designed to leave no room for claims of damage or theft. If he wanted to argue later that I'd destroyed something, he'd have to do it against a standard of care he'd never once brought to our shared life. By 1:30 p.m., every trace of Ethan I could legally remove was boxed and stacked in the garage. At 2 the doorbell rang. I had been expecting him. Men like Ethan rarely believe the first consequence is real. They assume every locked door is still a negotiation. They believe if they arrive in person with the right face, injured, reasonable, wounded, offended, some older version of the woman on the other side will materialize and rescue them from the mess they made. I moved to the front window, lifted one slat of the blind, and there he was, not alone. Rebecca stood beside him in a cheap white sundress that had already wrinkled badly in the July heat, her lipstick too pink, a visible tan line on her ring finger from a ring she must have recently swapped out. Behind them stood Margaret, dressed as though attending a tribunal at which she planned to be personally offended by everyone present, and Lily, Ethan's younger sister, wearing spite the way some women wear jewelry. The four of them together, new wife, scorned mother, loyal sister, the man who had thought a Vegas text would be enough, was so cosmically absurd it nearly made me laugh. Instead of opening the front door and giving them the dignity of a threshold, I hit the garage door opener. The door rolled up with a metallic groan. Sunlight poured over the neatly stacked boxes. Ethan stopped when he saw them. "Wow," he said. "Efficient. Didn't even wait." "You didn't come back," I said. "You got married." Rebecca looked at the driveway. Margaret surged forward. "This is outrageous, Clara. A wife does not throw her husband's things into a garage like garbage." "I'm not his wife anymore," I said. "And nothing here is garbage. Everything is packed carefully. You're welcome." Lily let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're such a control freak, Clara. Always have been. You're mad Ethan finally found someone who makes him happy." Even Rebecca flinched at the word happy. That flinch told me more than enough about how secure the honeymoon fantasy already was. Ethan planted his feet, squared his shoulders, dropped into that familiar, reasonable man posture. Hands on hips, voice low, expression injured. He'd always known how to make the woman arguing with him look emotional by comparison. "Look," he said, "I get that you're hurt, but you can't just shut me out. This house, I cut in, was purchased 3 years before I met you. Your name has never been on the deed." He went pale for a half second, then flushed hard from the collar up. Margaret hissed, "We'll call the police again. You can't erase a marriage in one night." "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what Ethan did." They argued. Margaret called me cold. Lily called me pathetic. Ethan muttered vague threats about lawyers he could not afford. Then came the rental truck. Rebecca stepped forward to pay, swiped her card through the driver's handheld reader. Declined. She frowned. Tried again. Declined. She dug another card from her purse. Declined. The driver coughed politely. "Ma'am, if the balance isn't..." Ethan yanked his wallet out and thrust his card at the machine. "Use mine." Rebecca turned toward him. "I thought..." "Shut up," he snapped. There it was. First visible crack in the fantasy. The new wife blinking in the July heat. While the old patterns emerged, the second reality asked for payment. I crossed my arms. "Looks like the Vegas glow wore off fast," I said. Lily snapped, "You think you're so smart, but you're bitter. Alone. 34. What do you even have left?" I stepped close enough that some of her bravado thinned under direct eye contact. "What do I have left?" I said softly. "My house, my career, my freedom, and I don't have Ethan." I let that sit. "Honestly, that last one's the best part." He flinched, just barely, but I saw it. Then I said almost gently, "Oh, and Rebecca, Ethan's company has a strict no fraternization policy. I've always wondered how HR would feel about a Las Vegas marriage between coworkers." Her head snapped toward him. "You said it wouldn't matter." "Rebecca," he said through his teeth. "Shut up." The air thickened. I gave them 1 hour to load up and leave. They argued to the end, but they packed. Box after box came down the driveway while the neighborhood pretended not to watch. By the time the truck rolled away and the street settled back into afternoon stillness, the house did something unexpected. It exhaled. The furniture hadn't moved. The rooms looked the same, but some invisible pressure had lifted. The kind you don't realize you're carrying until it's gone. 2 mornings later, I woke to a flood. Texts, tags, missed calls, Facebook mentions, Instagram alerts, even LinkedIn, which should be protected by law from family drama, and somehow never is. By the time I opened the first post, I understood exactly what had happened. Ethan had gone to war. Digital war, which is just old-fashioned character assassination with better lighting and a larger audience. Their story was coordinated and just polished enough to fool people who never pause before taking sides. Clara Jensen is abusive. She trapped Ethan in a loveless marriage. She controlled him, manipulated him financially. He finally escaped and found real love. Margaret posted a tearful selfie about sons who suffer in silence. Lily uploaded a photo of herself with Rebecca, captioned like she was protecting a wounded family member from toxicity. Ethan posted the centerpiece, him and Rebecca under a filtered desert sunset smiling stiffly, with some variation of finally found peace. The lies themselves didn't break me. What hit were the comments. People I knew, people who had eaten in my home. I always thought something was off about Clara. She did seem controlling. "Good for you, Ethan." My hands shook so badly I set the phone down. It wasn't gossip. It was a campaign. And for a few hours, it worked on me. Not because I believed any of it, but because public lies still invade the body. I got hot, then sick, then so furious I sat on the bedroom floor and breathed through it like a physical injury. Then I called David. David Okafor has known both Ethan and me for 6 years. He's a network engineer, the kind of man whose brain is so technical and morally uncomplicated that when you say, someone is lying about me online, his first response isn't ignore it, but let's see what proof they forgot to hide. He built my home office network after Ethan spilled beer into the modem and suggested the house wiring might just be bad. He's been completely immune to charm since approximately age 14, which meant Ethan had never quite known how to manage him. David answered on the second ring. Hey, you okay? I've seen some things. He's turning people against me. You start, David said, by not panicking. Then we fight back. I think I know how. By evening, he was at my kitchen table, laptop open, glasses halfway down his nose, fingers moving so fast over the keys they blurred. He muttered to himself, irritated engineer meets opportunistic detective. Ethan thinks he's clever, he said. He's careless. Same password patterns, same recovery questions, same synced browser sessions. He never clears anything because he assumes nobody else is looking. That sounds familiar, I said. I'm sure it does. I made coffee neither of us needed. Then David stopped. Jackpot, he said. He turned the screen toward me. Blue and white message columns. A year's worth of backed up conversations between Ethan and Rebecca, preserved in all their own spectacular stupidity. First came the sheer volume, then the words. She's so stupid. Been siphoning money from her grocery account for months. Almost saved enough for our dream wedding, babe. You think she'll notice the missing cash? And Ethan's reply, nah, Clara's too boring to check. Another, she's basically funding our escape and doesn't even know it. That's kind of hilarious. And then, when this blows up, play victim. Your mom will back you. I gripped the edge of the table hard enough to hurt. David kept scrolling. Hotels, gift purchases, plans, petty jokes about my habits and routines, which cards I used most when I usually shopped, how easy it was to skim an amount small enough not to notice quickly. I did not cry. Some betrayals are so complete they skip grief entirely and go straight to clarity. Ethan had not simply cheated. He had used me as infrastructure for the affair. My labor, my steadiness, my discipline, my boring, reliable competence. Everything he mocked had been the invisible platform under his entire fantasy. He'd called it boring energy. What it actually was the thing keeping his life from collapsing under the weight of what he was. You want me to package this? David asked. Yes. An hour later, I had a clean folder of screenshots. Timestamps intact, names visible, context untouched. No dramatic captions, no personal statement, no essay about female survival. Just the images, one after another, like evidence under bright fluorescent light. The internet flipped within the hour. Wait, he was stealing from her grocery account? This is vile. So he funded the wedding with money he siphoned from his wife? Rebecca married a clown. Margaret's post disappeared before midnight. Lily's not long after. Ethan's desert sunset peace photo collected increasingly hostile comments until it vanished sometime after 1 a.m. People who had rushed to pity him started messaging me privately, eager to reposition themselves on the right side of truth. I answered almost none of them. I had no appetite for loyalty that changed direction based on whichever screenshot had loaded most recently. Desperation made him sloppy. First came a voicemail for my boss, left by Ethan's father, Warren, a man who'd spent decades sounding aggrieved in the booming voice of someone who believed his age and gender should exempt him from consequences. He claimed I was stalking Ethan, harassing his new wife, creating an unsafe environment. My boss, Naomi Chen, Chief Operations Officer, 22 years in healthcare administration, called me into her office the next morning. She closed the door, opened her laptop, and said, "You should hear this." Then she hit play. Warren's voice thundered through the speaker, emotionally unstable, trying to ruin his career because she can't accept that he moved on. "If you have any integrity, you'll rein her in." Naomi muted it midway and looked at me over the top of the screen. "Your former in-laws," she said, dry as autumn, "have apparently decided this is a feudal dispute." I laughed before I could stop myself. "Sorry, don't apologize. It was the correct reaction." Then came the attempted break-in. 3 nights after the social media collapse, my security app pinged at 11:18 p.m. Motion detected. Rear entry. I opened the live feed. There he was at my back door, face lit bright and ugly under the porch light, yanking the handle and whisper shouting into his phone. "She locked me out. My stuff is still in there." He rattled the knob, bent toward the glass to peer inside, like the house itself had somehow forgotten his shape. I stood in the upstairs hallway in the dark and watched the feed and felt no fear at all, only contempt. I forwarded the clip to Miranda Foss, my attorney, 15 years family law, so decorated in the Chicago legal community that other lawyers spoke her name with a kind of reverence they usually reserved for judges. Her reply came back in less than 10 minutes. Noted, that was all. But when the woman handling your divorce can reduce attempted trespass to a single word and make it sound like the lid closing on a coffin, it has a calming effect. The pity strategy was the last one. He called my mother. I was sitting beside her on the couch. She'd come with soup, fresh bread, and that quiet maternal presence that doesn't crowd your pain but refuses to let it isolate you either. She frowned at the unknown number and answered anyway. By the second sentence, I knew it was him. "Mrs. Jensen," his voice came through, cracked and miserable. "I made a mistake. Rebecca means nothing. Clara is my life." My mother's face moved through slow, beautiful stages. Surprise, disgust, then something colder. I took the phone gently from her hand, put it on speaker, and waited. "Mrs. Jensen," he said again. actually sounding hopeful. My mother leaned toward the phone and said, "You should have thought of that before sleeping with Rebecca for 8 months." Then she hung up. I laughed so hard I nearly cried, and for the first time since that text, the tears that came didn't feel like grief. They felt like pressure leaving the body. She patted my knee and said, "You're stronger than he ever deserved." The next day brought one final absurdity. Unknown number. Female voice. Polite, strained, faintly desperate. "Hi, is this Clara? I'm Sarah, Rebecca's mother." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Could you maybe take him back?" she said. "Just until he gets on his feet? Young men do stupid things. Marriage is about forgiveness." I leaned against the counter, looked out at my backyard. A calm settled over me so complete it almost felt holy. "Marriage is about respect," I said, "and your daughter married a man who has none." Then I hung up. That night, Ethan called from a blocked number. I knew better and answered anyway. There's a point in every implosion when you want to hear the final thread snap with your own ears. His voice came through ragged. "You ruined my life, Clara. I hope you're happy." "I am, actually," I said. "Thanks for asking." Then I hung up and blocked the number. The silence that followed was no longer frightening. It was clean. By the time the divorce hearing arrived, I'd burned through anger and reached something far more useful: precision. The courthouse smelled like paper, disinfectant, and institutional endings. The accumulated weight of marriages, property disputes, and lifelong bad decisions sweated into the walls over decades. I arrived early in a simple navy dress, hair smooth, heels practical and sharp. Miranda was already in the lobby, immaculate and faintly amused, the way a chess player looks when they already know the board. "Ready?" she asked. "I've been ready since 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday," I said, one corner of her mouth tilted. When Ethan walked in, I barely recognized him. Not because he looked broken. Men like Ethan don't break in ways that produce tragedy, they just diminish. But because he'd lost weight in that sloppy way that happens when a person is surviving on adrenaline, takeout, and self-pity. His suit didn't fit right anymore. Rebecca followed behind him, pale and pinched. Margaret and Lily arrived last, dressed as if outrage had a formal dress code. Ethan tried to meet my eyes. I looked through him. The judge, Honorable Richard Carraway, had the silver-haired expression of a man who had witnessed every possible form of human stupidity across 30 years on the bench and had misplaced his capacity for surprise sometime around 2009. Ethan's lawyer opened with a face that told me he hated this case already. He looked like a man handed a leaking bag and told to present it as a portfolio. "Your Honor, my client contests the validity of the Las Vegas marriage. He was under emotional duress and—" "Duress?" the judge repeated flatly. "In Las Vegas." Miranda stood. "Your Honor, I have 73 pages of Facebook messages, text records, security footage, and financial statements proving Mr. Jensen planned this affair for over a year, funded it with money siphoned from my client's accounts, and knowingly entered a second marriage while still legally married to her." She dropped a thick folder on the table with a satisfying thud. Judge Carraway flipped through pages, then more pages. His eyebrows climbed. He stopped and read aloud, dryly. "She's basically funding our escape and doesn't even know it. That's kind of hilarious." He looked over his glasses at Ethan. "Did you write this?" Ethan swallowed. "That's out of context." Even the bailiff looked interested. "What context?" the judge said carefully. "Makes that sound better?" Silence. Miranda laid it out piece by piece. The affair timeline, the grocery account siphoning, the hotel receipts, the Vegas certificate, the company directory showing both of them under the same reporting structure, the security footage from my back door at 11:18 p.m., the social media smear campaign, the archived chats coordinating it. Each time Ethan's lawyer tried to soften facts into emotional confusion, Miranda answered with documentation so precise it felt surgical. "Not only did Mr. B. Jensen commit adultery," she said, "he committed bigamy. He legally married another woman while still married to my client. The evidence is indisputable." His lawyer tried one last weak pivot. "My client believed the marriage with Ms. Jensen was already— belief does not override law," Judge Carraway said. "He signed a second marriage certificate while still legally wed. I'm troubled that I have to explain that in a courtroom." A murmur moved through the room. The gavel cracked. Divorce granted. House and primary assets retained entirely by me. Ethan entitled only to his personal property and vehicle, with full financial responsibility for the vehicle. And because I had paid for his professional certification program during the marriage, 2 years of coursework he'd since used to increase his salary, he was ordered to pay 6 months of alimony at $500 per month, not because I needed it, because principle deserves a number. Relief moved through me so fast it felt almost like vertigo. Across the room, Ethan looked hollowed. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. Margaret clutched her pearls. Lily stared at me with the specific rage of someone whose meanness has failed them publicly. The real chaos happened outside. We'd barely reached the courthouse steps before Margaret detonated. "This is theft!" she screamed across the plaza. "You stole from my baby!" Sarah, Rebecca's mother, who had somehow also appeared holding an iced coffee, gaped at her. Then Lily flung her drink. She missed me. The coffee hit Sarah square across the blouse in a brown splash so perfectly timed that it seemed to silence the entire courthouse entrance for one stunned second. Then Sarah screamed, "You idiot! Watch your tone, tramp!" Margaret fired back, because apparently in her universe, every family dispute ultimately becomes regional theater. What followed was the most humiliating, caffeine-fueled gladiator match I have ever witnessed outside of reality television. Two mothers shrieking, coffee running down silk, security guards hurrying over with the exhausted expressions of men whose lunch break had just been canceled by suburban chaos. Miranda leaned close and murmured, "I've handled bankruptcies with less spectacle." I laughed so hard I had to hold the courthouse railing. Ethan had already slipped away by then, shoulders hunched, Rebecca stumbling after him. He never looked back. I heard later that he found comfort in the arms of a 22-year-old bartender that same night, which, if true, meant Rebecca lost that gamble before the chips had even settled. HR did exactly what I knew HR would do. The no fraternization policy, ignored while the affair still felt romantic, turned out to be very real when someone finally had reason to enforce it. Both Ethan and Rebecca were terminated within the week. Margaret got herself banned from a Starbucks after screaming at a barista who vaguely resembled me. Lily posted increasingly abstract things about toxic bloodlines and spiritual warfare. Sarah threatened to sue Ethan for emotional damages on Rebecca's behalf and was laughed out of the first law office she called. The whole family folded like wet paper, and my life exhaled. I sold the house. Beautiful as it was, I didn't want to live in a museum of my own ambush, stepping around ghosts in a kitchen I'd loved, beside a back door that still reflected security footage in my memory. The market was ridiculous. I accepted an offer well above asking and walked away with enough profit it felt less like closure and more like acceleration. I bought a condo downtown, smaller, brighter, mine, floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed concrete, morning sun in the bedroom, a balcony overlooking city lights, a kitchen compact enough that nothing inside it could disappear into neglect. I slept the first few nights with the balcony door cracked open just enough to hear the city below, not because it was romantic, because it reminded me I was living inside motion again. Not memory, motion. At my final meeting with Miranda, last signatures, last transfers, last dead administrative pieces filed and buried, she handed me a flat, gift-wrapped package. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside, a simple black frame. Mounted under glass was a copy of the Las Vegas marriage certificate. Ethan and Rebecca's names sprawled beneath a tacky neon chapel logo like a monument to impulsive stupidity. I looked up at her. "Easiest case of my career," Miranda said. "Thought you might want a souvenir." I laughed until my eyes watered. I hung it in the hallway just before the bedroom, where only people I trusted ever went. Not as a wound, not as a warning, as a trophy. Months later, I met Jacob at my gym. He wasn't theatrical or dangerously charming. He re-racked weights, wiped down machines, held doors without turning it into a personality trait. The first real thing he said to me was after a workout, when I was losing badly to a protein shaker lid. "If that bottle wins," he said, "you legally have to leave the gym." I laughed and handed it to him. He opened it in one easy twist, gave it back without making it dramatic, and went back to his water. We talked in fragments after that. Coffee downstairs, a Saturday farmer's market that turned into lunch that turned into 3 hours, and the easiest silence I'd experienced in years. One morning, after I'd mentioned Ethan's name only once in 2 weeks, and only as part of a joke about how peaceful life was without unexplained sneaker piles in the hallway, Jacob handed me a coffee, written on the cup in black marker, "Not Ethan." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled it. For the first time in years, I felt light, not the performed lightness of a woman proving she was resilient, the real kind, the kind that doesn't need an audience. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was actually living. The doctors failed to wake the billionaire for 10 years, until my daughter walked into room 701 and did something no one expected. The head of neurology called security on my 11-year-old daughter at 4:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. I know the exact time because I was mopping Ward C when my phone buzzed. A text from Rosa, the charge nurse on the 7th floor. "They have Amina. She's in the admin office. Come now." I dropped the mop so hard it cracked against the linoleum. I didn't even turn off the floor buffer. I just ran, in my rubber-soled work shoes, in my damp uniform, with bleach still burning under my fingernails, down 3 corridors and up 2 flights of stairs because the elevator would have taken 90 seconds I didn't have. When I got there, my daughter was sitting in a plastic chair outside Dr. Victor Hargrove's office, her feet not touching the ground, mud caked across her palms and sleeves, her school backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. 2 uniformed security guards stood on either side of her like she was a suspect. She was 11. She weighed 72 pounds, and she had just done something to a comatose billionaire that 3 continents worth of specialists couldn't accomplish in a decade. I need to back up. My name is Fatima Nasri. In 2014, I started working the night cleaning shift at Whitmore Memorial Medical Center in Hartford, Connecticut. Yes, that Whitmore. The hospital was named after the family. Leonard Whitmore's father had funded the East Wing in the 1980s, and Leonard himself had donated $14 million for the neurology pavilion in 2007. When Leonard fell into a coma in 2012 after a massive cerebral hemorrhage during a board meeting, they didn't transfer him to some facility. They kept him right there in room 701 of the private wing he'd personally paid for. A wing with its own nursing staff, its own ventilation system, and a door that required a key card I was never supposed to have. I got the key card in 2016, not because anyone trusted me, but because a pipe burst on the 7th floor at 3 a.m. and maintenance was short-staffed. They needed someone to mop the private corridor. The facilities manager, Dave Kessler, handed me a temporary card and said, "Don't touch anything, don't talk to anyone, don't look into the rooms." I didn't look. work. Not at first, but you clean a hallway enough times and the glass walls stop being invisible. You notice things. The soft green glow of the monitors, the mechanical rhythm of a ventilator, the absolute stillness of a man who used to run a $6.2 billion empire and now lay in pressed white sheets like a figure in a wax museum. Leonard Whitmore hadn't moved in years. I knew the nurses' gossip. Everyone did. The specialists from Johns Hopkins, the neurologist flown in from Zurich, the experimental drug trials that cost more per dose than I earned in a month. None of it worked. The EEGs showed minimal brain activity. The MRIs showed progressive atrophy. Dr. Hargrove, chief of neurology, 15 years at the hospital, published in The Lancet twice, had quietly recommended to the Whitmore estate that they begin transitioning expectations. That's doctor speak for giving up. The estate, managed by Leonard's younger brother, Gerald Whitmore, had been fighting that recommendation for years. Gerald controlled the trust. Gerald paid the bills. And Gerald, as I'd later learn, had very specific reasons for wanting his brother to stay exactly where he was, unconscious, alive, and unable to change his will. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew in the spring of 2022 was that I was a widow. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my daughter Amina had nowhere to go after school on the days my sister couldn't watch her. So Amina came to the hospital. I'm not proud of it. I want to say that up front. A hospital is not a daycare. But when your husband dies of pancreatic cancer at 41, and your family is 4,000 miles away, and you earn $16.50 an hour, and the after-school program costs $175 a week, you make decisions that aren't in any parenting book. Amina was good. She was quiet. She did her homework in the break room on the second floor. The nurses liked her. Rosa would sneak her apple juice. Marcus, the night shift radiology tech, taught her card games on his breaks. She knew which hallways to walk and which ones to avoid. She knew the rules. The seventh floor was off limits. Always. I told her that 100 times. I made her promise. But Amina was also the kind of child who noticed things other people had trained themselves to ignore. She noticed when the janitor in Ward B was limping and asked him if his knee was okay. She noticed when the vending machine on the third floor shortchanged people by a quarter and reported it to the front desk. She noticed the old woman in room 412 who never had visitors and left a drawing under her door. And she noticed the man in room 701. She told me about him once, about a month before everything happened. Mama, there's a man on the high floor who never moves. My stomach dropped. Amina, what were you doing on the 7th floor? I wasn't on it. I could see through the stairwell window. He's just lying there. Is he dead? No, baby. He's very sick. He looks trapped, she said. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. The day everything changed, April 19th, 2022, started with a thunderstorm. It had been raining all afternoon. Not a gentle rain either, the kind that turns gutters into rivers and makes the parking lot flood up to your ankles. Amina's school bus dropped her off at the hospital entrance at 3:45. She ran inside soaked to the bone. Mud splattered up her legs from the unpaved shortcut behind the bus stop. I wasn't there. My shift didn't start until 10 p.m. My sister was supposed to pick Amina up at 4:30, but my sister's car wouldn't start. Dead battery. She texted me at 4:12. I called Rosa and asked her to keep an eye on Amina in the break room until I could get a ride. Rosa said yes, but Rosa got called to a code blue on the 4th floor at 4:09. She was gone for 20 minutes, and in those 20 minutes, Amina left the break room. I've reconstructed what happened next from security footage, witness statements, and what Amina herself told me in her quiet, matter-of-fact way. Hours later, she walked to the stairwell. She climbed to the 7th floor. The stairwell door, which was supposed to lock from the outside, had a faulty latch, something the maintenance log showed had been reported twice and never fixed. She pushed it open. The private wing corridor was empty. The day shift nurse for room 701, a woman named Patricia Langford, had stepped away to use the restroom. The security guard assigned to the floor, a contract employee named Derek Bowman, was in the elevator lobby checking his phone. The door to room 701 was ajar. Patricia had left it open to air out the room after changing the bedding. Amina walked in. She stood at the foot of Leonard Whitmore's bed for what the security camera timestamps show was approximately 4 minutes. She didn't touch anything. She didn't move. She just looked at him. Then she climbed onto the visitor's chair beside his bed, and she started talking to him. I didn't hear what she said. Not then. The room had no audio recording, but Amina told me later, word for word, because my daughter has the kind of memory that holds onto sentences the way other children hold onto toys. I told him about Grandma, she said. I told him that Grandma was like him once. She couldn't move. She couldn't talk. But I knew she could hear me because when I sang to her, her finger would move, just a little. Nobody else saw it, but I did. Then I told him that people talked about him like he wasn't there. I told him that must feel very lonely. She paused, picking at the dried mud on her wrist. Then I remembered what Grandma used to say about the earth. My mother, Amina's grandmother, had been a healer in our village outside Marrakech, not a doctor. A woman who knew plants, who knew soil, who believed that the earth itself carried memory. She used to press cool mud to our foreheads when we had fevers. She said the earth remembers every person who has ever walked on it, and when you are lost, the earth can call you back. My mother died in 2019. Amina was 8. She was at her bedside when it happened. I never taught Amina my mother's practices. I didn't need to. Amina absorbed them the way roots absorb rain, silently, completely, without being asked. So when my 11-year-old daughter reached into the pocket of her rain-soaked soaked jacket and pulled out a handful of wet, dark earth, soil she'd scooped from the muddy ground behind the bus stop, and carefully, gently, spread it across the face of a comatose billionaire. She wasn't being strange. She was doing what her grandmother taught her. She was calling him back. Patricia Langford walked in 17 seconds later. I know this because I've watched the security footage more times than I can count. Patricia freezes in the doorway. Her hand goes to her mouth. She sees a small, mud-covered girl standing on a chair beside her patient, the most expensive patient in the hospital, smearing dirt across his face. Patricia screamed, not a word, just a sound, a sharp, involuntary shriek that brought Derek Bowman running from the elevator lobby. He burst into the room, saw Amina, and grabbed her by the arm, hard enough, I'd later learn, to leave a bruise the size of a plum. Amina didn't resist. She didn't cry. She just said, very quietly, "Look at his hand." Neither of them looked. Derek pulled her out of the room. Patricia rushed to the bedside and began wiping the mud off Leonard's face with sterile gauze, her hands shaking. She paged Dr. Hargrove immediately. It took Dr. Hargrove 11 minutes to arrive. In those 11 minutes, Patricia cleaned Leonard's face, checked his vitals, adjusted his IV line, and documented the incident in the patient chart. Heart rate, stable at 62. Blood pressure, 118/74. Oxygen saturation, 97%. Pupil response, fixed and dilated. Everything normal. Everything exactly the same as it had been for 10 years. Except, at the bottom of her chart note, I've seen the scanned copy. Amina's attorney subpoenaed it months later. Patricia wrote a single line that she later tried to say was a mistake. Involuntary flexion noted in left hand. Duration, approximately 2 to 3 seconds. Stimulus unclear. His hand moved. Leonard Whitmore's hand moved for the first time in 10 years, and Patricia Langford almost erased it from the record. What happened in Dr. Hargrove's office that afternoon was the beginning of the worst 3 months of my life. I arrived at 4:38. Amina was sitting outside the office. Inside, I could hear Dr. Hargrove's voice. Controlled, clipped, the way powerful men speak when they're furious, but don't want to be caught being furious. This is a biosecurity issue, not a feel-good story. A child, an unauthorized person, physically contaminated a high-acuity patient with soil. We're talking bacterial exposure. Fungal contaminants? Do you understand the liability? The hospital's risk management director, Sheila Voss, 22 years in healthcare administration, JD from Yukon, was in there too. I heard her say, "We need to contact the Whitmore estate immediately, and we need to document this as a security breach. The cleaning staff employee whose child this is should be placed on administrative leave pending." I pushed the door open. "That is my daughter," I said, "and before anyone places me on anything, I want to know why a grown man left bruises on an 11-year-old girl's arm." The room went very quiet. Dr. Hargrove looked at me the way people in his position always look at people in mine, like I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be heard. "Ms. Nasri, your daughter entered a restricted area and physically assaulted a patient." She put mud on his face. "She contaminated a vulnerable patient with an unsterile biological substance. Do you understand?" He moved. Another silence. Longer this time. "Excuse me? Ask your nurse." He moved his hand. "For the first time in 10 years. Ask her." Dr. Hargrove glanced at Sheila Voss. Then he picked up his phone and paged Patricia Langford. What followed was a masterclass in institutional self-preservation. Patricia came to the office. Dr. Hargrove asked her about the hand movement. Patricia said, and I will never forget the way her eyes flickered to Sheila Voss before she answered, "I may have observed a minor involuntary reflex, likely a spinal automatism. Not clinically significant." "Not clinically significant," Dr. Hargrove repeated, satisfied. He turned to me. "Ms. Nasri, your employment will be reviewed by HR. Your daughter is no longer permitted on hospital premises outside visiting hours. We will not be pressing charges at this time, but—" "Charges?" I said. "She's 11. But any further incidents will result in immediate termination and a trespassing complaint. Are we clear?" I took Amina's hand. I walked out. In the elevator, she looked up at me. "Mama," his hand moved. I saw it. "I know, baby. Why won't they listen?" "Because he's worth $6.2 billion and we mop their floors. Because the earth doesn't show up in medical journals. Because a little girl's word means nothing in a room full of degrees." I didn't say any of that. I just held her hand tighter. I should have let it go. That's what a rational person would have done. I had a job to protect, a daughter to feed, rent due on the 15th. The smart move was to keep my head down, follow the rules, and forget about room 701. But I couldn't stop thinking about Patricia's chart note. Involuntary flexion. Duration, 2 to 3 seconds. 3 days after the incident, I went to see Dr. Anand Mehta, a neurologist at Hartford General, completely unaffiliated with Whitmore Memorial. I'd found his name through a free clinic referral. I sat in his waiting room for 2 hours because I didn't have an appointment. When he finally saw me, I told him everything. Dr. Mehta, board certified, 14 years in practice, fellowship at Mass General, listened without interrupting. Then he said something that changed the entire trajectory of what happened next. "A spinal automatism is involuntary. It doesn't require a stimulus. But you're telling me this movement occurred within seconds of direct tactile and olfactory stimulation, physical contact combined with a strong organic scent. That's not a spinal reflex. That's a cortical response. And if it is, it means there's more brain function than anyone is acknowledging." He paused. "Has the hospital run a follow-up EEG since the incident?" They hadn't. I checked. I asked Rosa to look at the patient schedule discreetly. No new orders for Leonard Whitmore. No follow-up. No additional tests testing, nothing. Dr. Hargrove hadn't even gone back to check. Over the next 6 weeks, I did things I never thought I was capable of. I started keeping a journal. Dates, times, names, what was said and by whom. I photographed Amina's bruise before it faded. 4 pictures on my Samsung Galaxy, time-stamped, stored in a locked folder. I contacted the Whitmore estate directly, not Gerald. I couldn't reach Gerald, but I found the contact information for the estate's patient advocate, a woman named Claire Whitmore Desmond, Leonard's niece. She was listed on the hospital's emergency contact form, which I'd seen in the file cabinet during cleaning. I called her from a payphone outside the hospital. "My name is Fatima Nasri. I clean the 7th floor. I need to tell you something about your uncle." Claire listened. She was skeptical. Her voice had that polished distance that comes with money, but she listened. "You're telling me a child put dirt on his face and he responded physically?" "Yes, and the hospital isn't investigating. They aren't running tests." Dr. Hargrove dismissed it in less than an hour. Long pause. Then, "Give me your number." Claire Whitmore Desmond called me back 72 hours later. She'd spoken to her own medical consultant, Dr. Rebecca Torres, a neurologist at Columbia, specialist in disorders of consciousness, published extensively on covert awareness in vegetative state patients. Dr. Torres had reviewed Leonard's publicly available medical history and told Claire something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Torres says the last comprehensive consciousness assessment, a full fMRI protocol, was performed on Leonard in 2016, 6 years ago. The standard of care recommends reassessment every 2 to 3 years. It was never done. Why not? That, Claire said carefully, is what I'd like to know. The next month was a war fought in hallways and emails. Claire retained an attorney, David Chen, a healthcare litigation partner at Morrison & Hale, 20 years of experience, former assistant DA. He filed a formal request with the hospital for Leonard's complete medical records going back to 2015. The hospital's legal team, led by Sheila Voss, delayed. They cited patient privacy. They cited HIPAA. They cited ongoing clinical review. David Chen filed a motion with the probate court overseeing the Whitmore estate. He argued that Claire, as a listed family member and potential beneficiary, had standing to demand an independent medical evaluation. Gerald Whitmore's lawyers objected. This is when things got ugly. On May 30th, 2022, I was called into HR. The director, and a man named Paul Fremont, told me I was being terminated, not suspended, terminated, effective immediately. The reason? Violation of patient confidentiality and unauthorized disclosure of protected health information. "I didn't disclose any medical records," I said. "You discussed a patient's condition with an outside party. That constitutes a HIPAA violation." I told his family member that he moved. "That's not a medical record. That's what I witnessed." Paul Fremont slid a termination letter across the desk. "You can sign this voluntarily, or we can proceed with a formal investigation that will make future employment in healthcare very difficult for you." My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. I didn't sign it. David Chen took my case pro bono. He filed a wrongful termination complaint with the Connecticut Department of Labor and a whistleblower protection claim under the state's healthcare worker statutes. He also filed an emergency motion for an independent neurological evaluation of Leonard Whitmore. The court granted it on June 14th. Dr. Rebecca Torres arrived at Whitmore Memorial on June 19th with a portable fMRI unit and a team of 3 technicians. Dr. Hargrove was present. Gerald Whitmore was present. The first time, according to the nursing staff, that he'd visited his brother in over a year. Sheila Voss was present with 2 attorneys. The test took 4 hours. The results came back on June 22nd, and I remember the exact moment David Chen called me because I was standing in my kitchen making Amina's lunch, a cheese sandwich with the crusts cut off, and I had to sit down on the floor. "Fatima," he said, "Leonard Whitmore is conscious, not fully conscious, not awake in the way you or I are awake, but Dr. Torres's fMRI showed consistent, reproducible cortical responses to external stimuli. When they played recordings of familiar voices, specific brain regions activated. When they asked him to imagine playing tennis, a standard test for covert awareness, his supplementary motor area lit up like a switchboard. Leonard Whitmore had been aware at some level for years, and no one had checked. The report was 47 pages long. I didn't understand most of it, but I understood the conclusion, which David Chen read to me over the phone. The patient demonstrates clear evidence of command following on fMRI, consistent with a diagnosis of cognitive motor dissociation. This condition was potentially detectable as early as 2018 had appropriate reassessment protocols been followed. The failure to conduct standard of care consciousness evaluations over a 6-year period represents a significant departure from accepted neurological practice. In plain language, Leonard Whitmore had been trapped inside his own body, and the hospital, whether through negligence or something worse, had never bothered to check if he was still in there. And my daughter, with a handful of mud and a grandmother's wisdom, had known it before any of them. What happened next unfolded faster than I could process. Dr. Torres implemented an intensive rehabilitation protocol. Over the following weeks, Leonard showed increasing responsiveness, eye tracking, deliberate blinks, 1 for yes, 2 for no, a communication board, then, slowly, haltingly, words. The first word he spoke, on July 8, 2022, at 10:23 a.m., with Claire Whitmore Desmond, Dr. Torres, and a court-appointed witness present, was brother. The second word was nose. The investigation that followed was led by Detective Margaret Sullivan of the Hartford PD Financial Crimes Unit, 19 years on the force, decorated arrested twice. The Connecticut Attorney General's office opened a parallel inquiry. What they found was a conspiracy so banal and so monstrous that it made me physically sick. Gerald Whitmore had been drawing a trustee salary of $1.2 million per year from his brother's estate. He controlled all financial decisions. He had redirected over $40 million in estate funds to personal investments, shell companies, and a real estate portfolio in his own name. He had blocked multiple attempts by hospital staff to pursue aggressive treatment. And this was the detail that made Detective Sullivan's jaw tighten when she told me. He had personally communicated with Dr. Hargrove on at least 4 documented occasions, urging him to discontinue extraordinary measures and transfer Leonard to a long-term care facility where monitoring would be minimal. Dr. Hargrove's emails, subpoenaed by the court, showed he'd complied. He'd canceled the 2019 reassessment. He'd overruled a junior neurologist named Dr. Priya Kapoor, who had recommended updated testing in 2020, and buried her recommendation in an administrative file. Dr. Kapoor, when contacted by investigators, said she'd been told the family didn't want further interventions. Gerald wanted his brother unconscious. Hargrove helped keep him that way, and the hospital, through negligence, deference to money, or active complicity, had let it happen. The Connecticut AG filed charges in September. Gerald Whitmore was indicted on 14 counts, including embezzlement, fraud, and criminal neglect of a dependent person. Dr. Hargrove was charged with medical negligence and obstruction. His medical license was suspended pending review. Sheila Voss resigned before she could be fired. Patricia Langford, the nurse who'd almost erased the chart note about Leonard's hand movement, cooperated with investigators. She told them she'd been pressured by Dr. Hargrove to downplay the incident. He told me it was a reflex. He told me documentation would create unnecessary liability. She wasn't charged, but she transferred to another hospital within the month. Derek Bowman, the security guard who'd grabbed Amina, was fired. I didn't pursue charges for the bruise. Amina asked me not to. He was scared, Mama, she said. People do bad things when they're scared. 11 years old. My wrongful termination case settled in October. I can't disclose the amount. There's a confidentiality clause. But I can tell you that for the first time in my life, I didn't have to choose between the electric bill and groceries. More importantly, the hospital was required, as part of the settlement, to implement new protocols for consciousness assessment in long-term comatose patients, annual fMRI evaluations, mandatory second opinions, a patient advocacy liaison with independent authority. They call it the Whitmore Protocol now. David Chen told me they wanted to name it after Amina. I said no. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she saw a man who looked trapped and she tried to help him, the same way she'd help a stray cat or a lost tourist or a grandmother who couldn't speak but could still feel. Leonard Whitmore's recovery was slow and incomplete. By December 2022, he could speak in short sentences, move his left arm with assistance, and communicate reliably through a tablet. He would never walk again. He would never run a company again. 10 years of atrophy had taken things that no amount of money could buy back, but he was there. He was present. He knew who he was, where he was, and what had been done to him. In January 2023, Leonard's attorneys filed a revised will. I don't know all the details. That's family business. But Claire told me that Gerald was removed as trustee, and that Leonard had established a charitable trust for children of hospital support staff, scholarships, after-school programs, emergency childcare, and he asked to meet Amina. We went on a Sunday afternoon in February. The private wing was quieter now, less like a vault, more like a room where someone actually lived. There were flowers, a television, books on a shelf that someone had arranged with care. Leonard was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, thinner than any man I'd ever seen, his eyes deep set and extraordinarily alert. A speech therapist sat nearby. Claire stood by the window. Amina walked in and stood at the foot of his bed, just like she had 10 months before. She was wearing clean clothes this time. No mud. Leonard looked at her for a long time. Then he spoke. His voice was rough, damaged by years of intubation, barely above a whisper. You talked to me. Amina nodded. No one. He paused, gathering strength. No one talked to me. In 10 years. Not to me. They talked about me. Around me. Never to me. He swallowed hard. You said I must be lonely. You looked lonely. Amina said simply. I was. There was a long silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that's so full of meaning it presses against your chest. The mud, Leonard said. Why? Amina glanced at me. I nodded. My grandmother said the earth remembers us, even when people forget us. I thought maybe it could help you remember yourself. Leonard Whitmore, a man who had once commanded boardrooms and controlled billions, closed his eyes. A tear ran down his hollow cheek. Just one. It did, he said. I still clean hospitals. Different one now. Better hours, better pay, day shift. Amina is 13. She wants to be a doctor, not the kind that reads scans from behind a desk, the kind that sits beside patients and talks to them. Last month, she came home from school with a biology textbook and said, Mama, did you know that certain soil compounds have neuroprotective properties? There are studies, actual studies. I laughed so hard I cried. My mother never read a study in her life. She just knew, the way the earth knows where to send the roots, the way rain knows how to find the cracks in dry ground. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that stairwell door had latched properly, if Patricia hadn't left the room, if the storm hadn't come that day, hadn't soaked my daughter in mud, hadn't put the earth literally into her hands at exactly the right moment. I think about Leonard, lying in that bed for 10 years, aware, listening, unable to scream. I think about how the most powerful systems in the world, medicine, money, law, all failed him. And the thing that reached him was a child's muddy hand and the whispered memory of a grandmother from a village with no paved roads. Gerald Whitmore is awaiting trial. Dr. Hargrove lost his license. The hospital paid. The protocols changed. But none of that is what I carry with me. What I carry is this. My daughter walked into a room full of machines and money and silence, and she did the one thing that 10 years of expertise couldn't do. She treated him like a person. That's it. That's the whole story. The Earth remembers us, even when everyone else forgets.